Thanks for people for joining us today. Really excited to be able to have a discussion that a number of folks who you're going to be hearing from in a few minutes put together. Again, this is meant to be sort of informal and informative because none of us necessarily have the answers, right? I do just want to briefly point out that the idea of these types of sessions was supported by an Agricultural Genomes to Phenomes Initiative, which was supported by the United States Department of Agriculture and NIFA. And I wanted to point out to everybody that there's a whole bunch of groups that are working on these topics. So you might see some of the groups you're associated with listed here. I know there's others, but the challenge that we have is that there's a lot of different groups all trying to do similar things and oftentimes not talking to each other. So the part of the purpose of this meeting too is to provide a forum where many different groups with different interests, all using UAVs in agriculture, can get together and discuss important topics. So I will turn it over to Margaret, who Dr. Krause has helped put together this exciting program, and you'll hear from a number of speakers today. So thank you all for your joining and attendance, and feel free to put stuff in the chat if you have any questions.
Thanks so much, Seth. And I just want to thank my co-conspirators on this, Mahendra and Jacob Washburn, who helped organize this as well. And then I also want to thank the 4 speakers that we're going to hear from today. I think the impetus for this conversation was really that a lot of us have been affected by this issue in some way. Either we haven't been allowed to use certain equipment or softwares, or we're unsure what to budget for and grant proposals, things like that. So I think this is a really timely conversation. We'll be hearing from 4 speakers that have a bit of experience dealing with this already, or learning about some of the issues. And then at the end, we'll have time for a group-wide discussion and just trading notes on what people are doing, what has worked and what hasn't worked. So we will go ahead and get started. We'll be hearing from Jennifer Lachowiec from Montana State University about a survey that her group has been doing related to the use of UAVs in research programs. So Jennifer, are you able to share your screen?
I will share my screen. Let me get it loaded up. Which display are you getting?
The right one.
Yeah, we're getting the correct one.
Excellent. Okay. So thanks for the introduction. Like Margaret said, I've been working with other folks involved in a Ag2PI funded initiative that we named Drone to Phenome. And as part of this, I also worked with Felipe Matthias, Dave LeBauer, and Max Feldman. And one of our main goals was to try to find ways that we could empower more people to utilize phenotyping in their agricultural research. And as Margaret said, a part of this was trying to identify bottlenecks. And we're here to talk about one of those bottlenecks, which was regulatory bottlenecks. And so I want to share with you what our survey entailed and what we saw in regard to regulatory bottlenecks amongst the survey respondents. So what we performed was an international survey of potential drone users, current drone users, and people who happened to answer the survey to understand barriers to broader use of UAVs or UAS in agriculture. And I think many of you have taken this survey or have seen some of the advertisements for it, or even seen a few of the results. So for this survey, we worked with Montana State University Social Science Lab, the HELPS lab. And we designed this survey that had 3 different tracks where we were inquiring information from current drone users, those who are interested in using drones, future users, and those not interested in using drones. And we were able to compile and reach 154 respondents from across the world, including 21 different countries, the majority of which were in the United States, 2/3. And we also captured a bit more demographic information about the folks taking the survey as well. We asked people what industry they worked in. Were they working in the private sector? Are they working at universities or institutions, research institutions. And so sorry about the slides. So 56% were from research institutions or universities, 23% from the private sector, and 10% from government entities. And across these folks, many different disciplines were represented, with the most representing agronomy and breeding and genetics. So a lot of the group that is probably joining us today. So we asked people what the value of drones was. What did they perceive the value to be? Currently, the current users, which was 41% of the respondents, found great value in drones. So we had current users finding drones very valuable, which is not surprising because they're using them. A good percentage finding them valuable, and some viewing it as can be valuable. Generally, overall, whether a user was current or future, there was high value found in using drones. And in terms of those who found minimum value, it's interesting because there are some users that are finding that they are minimally valuable, and that could be due to the fact that there are limitations in how they can use them. And again, not surprisingly, the perceived value is higher among active users. Now, getting into the bottlenecks, this is the part that I wanted to share with you the most. When we asked people what they perceive the bottlenecks or barriers to adopting drones in their research, and this is whether they're considering what barriers they actually experienced versus barriers that they think would happen if they tried to use drones. The number one was the high cost of instruments. Number two was the lack of personnel trained to analyze data. Number three was lack of personnel trained to collect data. And if we go down that list a bit further, we found that the fifth perceived bottleneck were regulatory challenges. And so this is this result is from merging both current users and future users. When we stratify those two groups, we find that regulatory challenges are the fourth most common block, whereas for future users, it's a little bit lower. So that perception of that there are regulatory challenges, those really come to light once you start using UAVs in your research. And so we found, this is really interesting because this is very high on the list of options we provided to people and is being perceived as a major barrier for many. And across this set, this was approximately, as I said, we surveyed about 150 people, and this was 40 people that listed regulatory challenges among their top 3 barriers. So it ends up being very common across people. We wondered if drone adoption was driven by larger or better funded programs. And so one of the things that has come up in terms of regulatory challenges is that if a UAV is on the blue list, it's often more expensive than other drones on the market. And so we wondered if that cost could be driving some issues. However, we found that if we considered the funding of programs, so what I have pictured here on this axis is, again, this was a worldwide survey. So we asked people what were the funding levels of their research groups. And so we had funding from these various amounts, so 0 to 500, 500 to 1,000, 100,000 K plus. And this was funding per year that could be used towards software or instrumentation. And so we wondered if future users tended to have less funding than current users, but we did not see these bubbles indicate the number of people that indicated the different answers. And we don't see that current users tend to be better funded than potential future users. We also wondered if the team size would be different between future or current users. And so we found no major difference in the funding or team size between those. And so funding really isn't one of the major barriers necessarily to whether a person is currently using drones among the people who answered this survey. So we also considered and collected what we think a drone program or a agricultural research program utilizing UAVs with sensors would cost. And so we broke this down, and we have one column indicating the minimum entry cost versus the premium options. And so we included aspects like pilot training and the FAA Part 107 tests to complete, and those approximate costs. We included what is the cost of a light to medium duty drone on the open market versus one that is compliant with US government regulations. And so, for example, on the open market, we can find a minimum entry drone for $500 or even less versus a US government compliant drone of closer to $3,000. And again, this is a light to medium duty drone, so a smaller drone. And then throughout, we have, obviously, there are many options in terms of what you're going to add on to the drone, but we suggest that if you incorporate ground control points or RTK and so forth, and utilize software that is freely available versus subscription, the minimum cost to entry would be approximately $13,000 for a program. And again, that would be selecting options on the more affordable or economical side. So again, when we consider what the budgets are that people currently have and what they can afford to spend, really when we consider the cost differences in terms of regulation, we have differences in the costs of drones for light to medium duty drones, again, whether they're compliant or not. And we can consider whether this is a restriction on our research enterprise. So what I have pictured here is the Skydio 2 Plus version of, this is a US government compliant drone, which costs about $3,000. So this is one of the lowest ends that you can find. And so this is one that is perhaps on that minimum entry cost to access and get going on a research program. And if we consider medium to heavy duty drones, these numbers are much, much greater in terms of, and the difference is much, much greater between what you can find on the open market versus what is compliant and on the blue list. And I just wanted to wrap up that in my case, I'm very fortunate that in terms of my institution and in my state, Montana State University, our requirements continue to be fairly minimal. We don't have any restrictions right now in terms of accessing or purchasing particular instruments or UAVs or software at this time. Our compliance includes ensuring that we have remote ID, licensed pilots, that our vehicles are insured, and that we submit flights. So that's the extent that we're working with right now. So I'm really interested in hearing what other people are experiencing and whether that's coming to us or not. I'm not sure. And so with that, I would just want to acknowledge the other folks on the Drone to Phenome team, again, who I worked with, Felipe, David, and Max. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Do we have any questions? You can unmute yourself and ask or put something in the chat. And then we'll also have time later at the end to have a conversation when you can ask questions to any of the speakers. Okay, thank you so much, Jennifer. I think we'll just keep moving on for now and then continue at the discussion at the end. So I'm gonna hand it over to Mahendra.
Thank you, Margaret. Next speaker is Ace from USDA-ARS. He works as a research scientist in Lubbock, Texas. And the reason we wanted to have Ace is that, okay, we wanted to know what is going on with USDA, and he's going to share us what they have been doing and how they are tackling this issue. And along with Ace, we do have Jacob as well, and he's working in USDA-ARS in Missouri. So we wanted to have some kind of a broader perspective from the USDA side. So Ace, I'll hand over to you.
Well, actually, I'm gonna hand it over to Jacob at first,
Okay.
and I'll take over midway through.
Okay.
Okay, so can you see my slides and hear me?
Yep.
Looks great.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so yeah, Ace and I kind of worked together to try to put together some ideas that might be helpful to some of you. We've been in the USDA, we've kind of been working at this game for about 3 years now. And so, you know, we have at least some experience. If I can get my slides to move forward. So first, I just wanted to put the needed disclaimers. You know, you're all scientists. Please, you know, do your research and think for yourself, and don't take anything that we say as being necessarily true or official or legal advice or anything like that. I also want to point out that really the interpretation of the current laws in this area is just crazy. Like nobody really knows how to interpret these. And that is true within, at least as far as I can tell, within the federal government, every agency, every, you know, even from office to office, people are there are different interpretations, right? And then lastly, again, kind of a similar point is that these are really just our opinions and our observations, right? We're not allowed to give any authoritative statement from ARS. This is not what anyone at USDA wants or is recommending that you do. This is just what we've found. Okay, so I wanted to tell a little bit about what's been going on over the past few years in the federal government, or at least what I've been able to observe. So really the Department of Defense is the first entity that I'm aware of that started getting rid of, kind of phasing out DJI and some other foreign-made drones. And in 2020 is when they started this Blue UAS program. It was actually kind of partially mandated by Congress. And so this program is basically for the DoD to vet and determine which drones they should use, right? And so it is very much Department of Defense focused in terms of the things that they put on there. And these are not the kind of drones that are, you know, overshooting missiles. These are commercial drones, entirely commercial drones. So the National Defense Authorization Act in 2020 kind of put this in motion for, at least for the DoD, but the 2021 NDAA sort of had, at least that's my understanding, is that was when some of these rules became applicable sort of across the federal government. As I said earlier, you know, the interpretation and implementation of these rules continues, right? And so there's a lot that we still don't know about how different agencies are going to use these rules, right? Or what exactly they mean, or what the lawyers think they mean. But basically, there are certain foreign countries, China being the biggest one, that any UAS of any kind that contains a part that was made in that country cannot be purchased by the federal government, right? That's sort of the basic piece of it. I don't know if that extends to like a screw that holds together the drone. I think it's mainly electronics, but I'm not positive on that. So far, I am not aware of any application of this law to federal grants or it being clearly spelled out. Maybe some of you are aware of that. You know, I keep expecting when I look in the grant solicitations that there's going to be a rule in there at some point. And, you know, in my opinion, it's just a matter of time until that happens, right? But I don't know. That's just, yeah, just the way the winds seem to be blowing. So in ARS specifically, and again, these are not really policies per se. I don't necessarily know what which things are policies or not. This is just what I have observed at various locations across ARS and people who I've spoken to over the past 2 or 3 years, as sort of what they're doing, right? And what things they've tried to do and been told they're not allowed to, right? So basically, no DJI UAS at all. That's pretty much been the case since 2021, 2022. Contracts to other companies, like if you wanted to hire a university core facility to fly your fields, or a company, you know, I've been told that that's not being allowed, at least in some parts of the agency. Also, any sort of repairs or purchases of even something that's totally unrelated to DJI, if you intend to use it on your DJI drone, you're not allowed to buy it, right? So, you know, again, this may vary for different sites. These are just things that I've heard people say. So to date, as far as I know, there's been no sort of ban on using previously purchased drones. It's just their purchase and repair. You know, after 3 years, it's pretty difficult to still be using these drones if you can't buy any new batteries or anything like that, right? So, so the federal government, I think it is basically not using UAS drone or DJI drones. And in the next 2 or 3 years, I think that will be almost entirely the case. The USDA has, I've been involved in discussions about, you know, perhaps generating some kind of our own list, right? Because again, the DoD list, it's really for the military, right? So it doesn't really apply oftentimes to what we want. So there are various discussions about this. Nothing has been formally put in place that I'm aware of yet, but I think there are some discussions that are getting pretty mature, and something like that may happen soon. There's also this kind of green list that some of you may have heard about. This is kind of an industry group that's vetting drones based on the NDAA requirements. And again, I don't know of any organization in or outside the federal government actually using this list as sort of an authoritative source. But I think there's a good chance it could become a pretty important source for people in the future. If they don't have the drone you want, you can pay them some enormous amount of money. I think it's like $50,000 to $100,000 for them to look at the drone you want and vet it and decide if it can go on the list. Okay, so Ace. I think you're muted, Ace.
Yeah, I got it. So as kind of a continuation on what Jacob was talking about, so they've been kind of skirting around taking away the DJI drones, but there's actually the American Security Drone Act of 2023, which has been introduced to the House, which is much more explicitly banning DJI and other drones that have parts that were manufactured in China. And so even though the rules so far have been a little bit more nebulous in terms of like, can you use these drones, can you not? Once this comes down, it's going to be a lot more clear what we can and cannot use, I think. So a total ban on these things seems likely in 2024. So this law it has a few specific exceptions, but from what I've read, federal agencies and employees and contractors that are working with the federal government are no longer going to be permitted to use these drones for official purposes. My understanding, as Jacob said, is that this is probably also going to extend to projects using federal funding, but I'm not saying that definitively either right now, because it's kind of, that may be changed or be modified. This this bill is not going to include a ban at the consumer or recreational level. So private citizens that own a DJI, they can still fly them, but that doesn't help us as researchers very much, obviously. So the ban would take effect actually 2 years after the bill is signed into law. So something people may not realize is that the bill as it's written now, you do have a like offboarding period to stop using these drones. But I think that you need to start looking for solutions now, because if you wait till the last minute, it might be hard to procure a drone that does fit within the new rules. I know that some of you at universities have actually already stopped using DJI. So it seems like I'm not sure the individual situation with that, whether it's you're preemptively getting rid of them to get out ahead of these laws, or if there's some other rules that are affecting that. But either way, it might be smart to start going that direction. So how does this affect us? Well, obviously, DJI has been kind of a gold standard for drone research for the last few years. I think most labs have at least one DJI drone that they use or have used in their research. The reason for this is just that there's not very many non-Chinese drones or drones that have non-Chinese parts that are suitable for research from what I've seen. It's very hard to find any good drones that don't have at least something that originated in China. So then we get to the kind of confusing question of what drones would actually be allowed. Well, there's a lot of different categories that the government is using to refer to the drones, and it's not 100% clear which drones are going to be okay and which aren't, which kind of goes towards the need for a very clear list of what is allowed, as Jacob said. Because we have blue UAS, which are the most likely to be a safe bet in terms of you're not going to break the new rules. But the problem that you run into with the blue UAS is that most of those are not intended for research. Most of those, from what I saw, were kind of like for military or search and rescue, that kind of thing. So as far as like actual research grade options that can replace a Phantom 4, for example, it's difficult to identify good options on the blue list. Skydio might be one of the only ones that I've identified as being a good bet. I think we would still be able to acquire them maybe in the government, but I know that the CEO recently said that they're not going to be available to consumers anymore. So that's something to keep in mind. So in our lab, we've shifted away from using DJI completely at this point. I think the only thing we use our Phantom 4 for is just to try out a new sensor. We just put it on there and try out the sensor. But as far as using it for actual research or anything, we've stopped using them because we can't get them repaired and we've had crashes. So we've kind of switched as a temporary stopgap to using the Autel Evo 2. But those of you familiar with Autel do know that it's owned by some Chinese individuals, so it's probably going to fall under this new rule. But it's kind of in a gray area because the Evo 2 model is assembled in America and the sensors are not Chinese, so we're going to have to see if it makes any of those approved lists. We've been looking at Skydio and maybe Skyfish as options. And then you also have the option of building custom drones, which obviously that's a way to do it very safely, but it's also very technical. I don't think most of us know how to do that. So from there, I'll go ahead and pass it back to Jacob so he can talk about some solutions he's started working on.
Okay. Yeah, and I know it's about 3, so Margaret or Mahendra, if you can pull us at any time, just tell me and we'll stop. Okay. So some of the solutions that that in my lab, so we've decided basically, we've done our best to just purchase blue list drones because it's the safest bet. And you know, it has, I will say, since the first time I looked at that list, I think in 2021, it has improved. It's still not great, but there are some better options than there were at that point. But really nothing. Well, I guess the Skydio, I guess there is that's the Skydio one with some built-in sensors that are, you know, not just RGB, but predominantly there's not much with built-in choices. So we have purchased a Alta X from FreeFly, and I know several other people who own these as well. We have not actually flown it yet. That will be this summer, will be our first time, but other people I've talked to have said that it's a pretty good drone. You know, it's expensive, at least the government version of it. They have a government version and a non-government version. And the government version, I think, is like 32 or 35 grand now. What I've been told is that it's not as user-friendly as DJI. And even if you're a very experienced pilot, you should take the 2-day training course to be able to fly this drone, right? Very customizable. You can pretty much add any sensors you want to it. The other drone that I purchased 2 years ago was this Parrot AgriLife USA drone, which is also on the blue list. This is really kind of a medium, really a low res now, RGB camera. So it's, you know, I basically just bought it as like, hey, this is something easy we can do RGB flights with. And frankly, it's been terrible for the past 2 years. Lots of problems. We've had 2 crashes that were both due to software, firmware problems with the drone. You know, this is one that the U.S. military buys in the hundreds or thousands. So the company that sells them in the U.S., which is not Parrot, it's another company. You know, they really are not interested in supporting somebody who buys one drone from them. So supposedly it's getting better. People have had some better experiences with the updated firmware and things in the past year. It also has a thermal camera, which we didn't really care about, but as looking at it as a possibility, really it's not suitable for any kind of scientific work. It's just good for finding people hiding out in forests or something. I do have now just a couple of slides on different drones used by different groups, and I'm happy to go through those very quickly or end to stay on time. But basically, I guess not hearing none, I'll go ahead. So I know the FreeFly Astro is being used by several USDA groups, and I'm told pretty successfully that they like it. You know, this is something that can fly like a Mica Sense type camera. It's not on the blue list, but is still, you know, potentially going to be allowed in the coming years. Not as user-friendly, but still pretty good from what I've been told. This Wintegra is also being used by at least one USDA lab I know of. It's a fixed wing, so it may not fit your program depending on the kind of stuff you do, but it's pretty customizable. They come with a high-res RGB or one of the Red Edge P cameras, but they're willing to work with you to put other sensors on there. You know, it's got pretty good as far as like the sort of like RTK. You know, they claim you don't need any ground control points with it. And the things that I've heard from the people who have actually flown it is that it's really, really great, easy to use, good customer support. They even like the mission planning software and those kinds of things. The other one is the Skyfish M4 is one that I know at least one person in ARS is using. And again, fairly reasonable payload, although I'm a little skeptical of their numbers. But They've been happy with it for the most part, but the support has not been great when they've had problems. And there seem to be some reoccurring software issues that are, not a deal breaker necessarily, but are really frustrating when it happens every single time you fly and it's the middle of the summer. So anyway, that's it that I have. Those are just some that I've heard things about. Thank you, and happy to take any questions probably at the end to keep on time.
Thank you, Jacob and S. I think that was a really good summary of how you all are dealing and what is the situation in USDA. Should we continue with the questions or should we wait for the later part, Margaret?
I think we should keep moving.
Okay.
And wait till the end.
Okay, sure. Yeah, as Seth mentioned, please post your questions or comments in the chat as well. And our next speaker is Jose Landivar. Jose is a senior research associate at Texas A&M AgriLife at Corpus Christi, and he's leading the UAV data collection, processing, and tools development in our program. So I'll let Jose take it from here.
Appreciate it, Mahendra. Good afternoon, everyone. So in a little bit of history for us at Texas A&M, in March of 2021, guidance was received regarding mitigating measures that needed to be taken in order to make sure that no information was being exported to China via the DJI drone. In October of 2022, DJI was added to a list of Chinese military companies operating directly or indirectly in the US. And then early last year, we were banned from buying any item, any DJI item. Now, what this meant for us as the Deputy Chancellor from A&M mentioned, Texas did not ban the use of DJI products, only ban buying any new items from them. So until additional information is issued, we are still allowed to fly DJI drones. Now, some of the mitigating measures that we received was to make sure that the data sharing option on the UAVs must remain off. We are also requested to remove all data from the drones before making any updates. And we were also requested to not upload any research into the DJI cloud. Right, then later on, they banned the DJI website. So meaning it cannot be accessed on any of the A&M network. And then if you buy a laptop or a desktop from the A&M vendor, you are not it doesn't let you access the DJI website, even on a Wi-Fi network outside of A&M. So how our research was impacted? For data processing, we don't have any issues using Agisoft Metashape, so we're good on that side. But now every time we need to, to make an update on the DJI drones, we're not allowed to do it on the Texas A&M network. Now, as I had mentioned before, even though we are still allowed to use DJI products, as Ace suggested earlier, it's not a good idea to depend on it because not being able to buy parts is risky, obviously. So what we did, we started to look for non-DJI UAVs to have at least one backup for each one of the sensors that we use, right? And then we obtain new UAVs, and then we spend a little bit of time to familiarize ourselves with the new workflow, right? So some DJI alternatives that we found. The first two on the left, they are companies based in the US, and then the last one on the right side, outside of the US. They might not be on the blue list, but they are not banned, so we're allowed to buy from them. And then in the bottom, as Ace also mentioned, these two are companies, Autel and Yannick. They are not banned, but they are Chinese, so they might be banned in the future, right? And these are some of the alternatives for hardware. Now, in terms of the software, even though we are allowed to use edges of Metashape, it depends on the project. I heard of some cases that if you are working with USDA, that's not the case. They, do not allow to use edges of Metashape. So in that case, what I would recommend is to use Pix for the mapper, right? And then we also have two more alternatives. Open Drone Map, it's an open source alternative, meaning you have the option to use it without having to buy a license. One of the most common used drones, in my opinion, is the DJI Phantom 4, right? Which we also have it, but as I mentioned before, we looked for an alternative, and we bought the Astro Free Flight, right? And basically, a quick comparison between these two. The Astro Free Flight, it has a tendency to be heavier. It uses two batteries instead of one. In comparison with the DJI Phantom 4, they both fly, about half an hour. Obviously depends on the sensor that you use, right? So the Astro Free Flight, we got it with a Sony RGB camera. This camera has about 61 megapixel resolution, and the DJI Phantom 4 has only 20 megapixel resolution. So it's a much higher resolution, allows you to fly higher and get more detail, but it also it might increase the time for data processing because the images, they take more space. In terms of georeferencing, we got the RTK equipment for the Astro, but even if you do and you use it correctly, I would still, highly suggest that you keep using ground control points. And then the cost is obviously a huge difference in cost. Depending on, without a sensor on it, it costs about 20,000. While the DJI Phantom 4, it usually costs up to $8,000. On the left side, we have all the sensors that we have tested in our lab with the Astro, right? So it's very easy to remove and install the sensors on it. We have one for LiDAR, one for multispectral, and one for RGB. And then on the right side, I just took this image out of the FreeFly website. They have a list of all the sensors that are compatible with the Astro FreeFly. And then on the website, they have, different suggestions for if you have a large area or a small area, right? The flight speed, the altitude, and the overlap, it's slightly different depending on the application. These suggestions, by the way, are for the RGB camera, right? You need to make some adjustments depending on the sensor that you use. And then on the right side, basically what it shows is that the lines for the mission planning, the angle, it should match the longer distance, basically. This to reduce the time it takes to change the lines. And I just wanted to show you this image. We've been using Astro FreeFly RGB for the past 3 months now, and using the recommendations on their website, we've been able to get high quality images like the one I showed right now. This image was taken at 8 meters per second as the ground speed and 120 meters above ground level. So, I know it's way more expensive as a DJI, but if you're looking for, non-band RGB alternative, I would highly recommend the Astro FreeFly. With that, I conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jose. So I think we're gonna go back to discussions and questions if you have any.
Should we maybe wait till the end for questions?
Oh, yeah, sure.
We
sure.
have one more presentation. So I'd like to introduce Kevin Wang from University of Florida. He is a professor of plant phenomics and has been dealing with some regulatory situations in Florida. And so he's here to share his experience with us. So Kevin, are you able to share your screen?
Yes.
Great.
Yeah, thank you, Margaret.
Go for it.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kevin Wang. I'm assistant professor in the Department of Agriculture and the Biological Engineering Department. So it seems like Florida may be the only state that has like a pretty bad restrictions on the UAV application for agriculture. So I just want to give you some like a timeline, like in different stages, how the restrictions are and what are the responses. I will not call that solutions because I would say maybe that's not a solution, but how we kind of like work on that. So, and also I want to mention like all the UAVs I put that in my slides. It's not the recommendation. It's just what I heard from people in Florida they're using. So it's not like a recommendation from me. Okay. So I divided this stage into 4 stages. So I think like a lot of the speaker that just mentioned, before January 2022, in Florida, we just had this restrictions for no approval for new orders of DJI related equipment. That's only a restriction, but that including all the UAVs, the batteries, sensors. That means the DJI cameras, DJI LiDAR, DJI GPS, or DJI gimbal. And also someone mentioned there are some third-party accessories. For example, if there are some sensor holders, connectors that will be used for DJI camera or DJI drones, we cannot order any of them. So pretty strict, pretty bad restrictions. But as a response, there are no clear ordering restriction for some other UAVs. For example, someone mentioned Autel. Although it's still kind of like the Chinese manufactured drone. So for example, this is a modified Autel Evo 2, like carrying its own RGB camera, and we added another multispectral camera to this drone. That's stage 1. So in stage 2, that's kind of like from January 2022 to December 2022. So this new Florida statutes take place. So as I mentioned here, you can see as of January the 1st, we cannot order any drones, except those ones on this Florida Department of Manufacturing Service list. So I will show you those all 5 manufacturers later. But good news is we can still use the drones, for example, like DJI or some other drones until January the 1st, 2023. So that's what we kind of like, we still have some, time left for us to figure out some, solutions. As I said, the users, like research scientists, faculties, if we have the UAVs, the DJI UAV, we can still use that to collect data, but we cannot buy any new parts or, or do any maintenance of those DJI drones. And for all those, manufacturers approved by Florida, there are only 5. And you can see the Skydio, the Parrot, the called Altavian or Tavian. But actually, once this Florida statute take place, this company was bought by FLIR, And the 4th one, the Teal Drones and Vented Robotics. So, if you check all those drone options, you will figure out a very common feature point is all those drones have a built-in camera. But unfortunately, there are not so many options for research, applications. They're either, RGB cameras with not a very high resolution, or maybe only a thermal camera with a RGB camera, but no options for multispectral or hyperspectral, cameras. As you can see, someone mentioned the Skydio 2 Plus, this Parrot NIFA USA. And I want to mention this is the FLIR Skyranger R70. Why I mention that here, although it's not on the list, is because this company, Altavian, is bought by FLIR. So kind of like this, kind of like a loophole is the FLIR drones, maybe we can order, from according to this Florida statutes. But unfortunately, that one is super expensive. It's above $70,000. And the reason is because this is a fully like a military use drone. And they have a lot of those even high-end GPUs on board for those real-time applications. So that's why it's super expensive. Okay. And beginning from July the 1st, the Florida state government requires all those, drone users who have those drones not on the approved list to submit this comprehensive plan for discontinuing use. So at that time, we have to submit, for example, no matter how many drones you're using, you have to submit this, form to the state government to, prove that, okay, we're having a plan to discontinue the use of those unapproved drones. And then after that, starting from January 1st, 2023, like all the unapproved drones kind of like are landed, and we cannot use them for data collection. But there's kind of like some horizon we can see is starting from December 2022, there's some new rules under discussion in the state of Florida. So it's called this Unmanned Aerial Systems Minimum Security Requirements. So that gives us some potential. Probably we don't have to only order the drones on those from those 5 manufacturers. So someone mentioned that NDA compliances or the UAS blue list right now is probably the version 2. But unfortunately, still in that kind of like a 4-month period, only the approved UAVs can be used for data collection. But someone may ask, okay, we have some project. We have you know, we have to use the drone to collect data. Unfortunately, we only have the DJIs, or we have to using some of the unapproved drones for data collection. What can we do with that? There are some options. So for example, if your, say, collaborator is outside Florida, you may invite them to bring their drone to Florida to fly for you, to collect data. So that is like one option. So we can use that. The second thing is we can find some service provider. That means we can pay for those other like approved, say, commercial service providers using their DJI drones or their DJI sensors to collect data for us, for research. But, you know, they may charge you for some like very, you know, much more than you just buy your own drone. They may charge you by acres or by, you know, flying time or, you know, flying frequency. Third option is you can build your own drones. Unfortunately, that will also require this FAA certification. So you can imagine if you want to build your own drone, you may spend a lot of time, the funding, and also you have to, maybe you need to wait over a long time for this FAA certification. But still, that's an option. Okay, so after April the 5th, so that's, we got some like, you know, good news is that new rules or compliances is approved by the Florida government. So that means the aircraft, you know, can be evaluated to determine if that meets, you know, the state rules. At UF, we have to submit a risk assessment, you know, for data flow, for data collection, and for the software we can use. So in that case, so we can submit those, you know, documents for assessment, like the aircraft model, or, you know, for example, what kind of sensor you're using or what software you're using, and trying to meet the rules, you know, this new compliance rules. So although like, you know, the UAVs on the blue list, you know, may not be approved, like automatic approved, but kind of like we are trying to follow that, this DIU Blue UAS clear list. Currently is version 2. For example, as far as I know, some faculty members in Florida, they're using drones such as those ones. For example, this Inspire Flight, you know, IF 120 2000A, or someone mentioned that IF 750 or IF 800. And this Free Fly Out X, I know someone using that. Even this fixed wing sense, this ED, you know, AG, someone using that for some extension project in Florida. But as you can see, all of them is kind of like a little bit expensive compared with the DJI drones or some other, you know, unapproved drones. But that is the option, you know, we can use. I think that's it. That's what I can share according to our, you know, experience. So hopefully you can learn from that, maybe give you some, you know, options that you can follow. No, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kevin. And thanks to all 4 of our speakers today. We now have just over 30 minutes to kind of have an open discussion. So I think we've had a few questions or comments in the chat. Love to see that. Is there anyone who would like to bring a topic from the chat into the wider group?
I guess I'll start. I mean, one thing that's sort of notable to me is the contractor option. And it sounded like the first few speakers said that wasn't an option, but it is for University of Florida. I don't know if anybody cares to comment on that.
Are you referring to the possibility that the ban potentially coming this year might make it where contractors can't work with the federal government using the drones? Or
Yeah, I thought you said that they already could not work with the federal government.
Jacob might be able to comment on that, but I'm not sure right now.
So I don't know if there's an official policy not allowing that. I just know that several, at least some people that I've talked to have tried to do that and they've been told they couldn't. within the federal government. But there may be people who have been allowed to do it. I don't know, right? Yeah.
And I wonder if that extends to workflows as well, such as using Agisoft. If you can't process it with Agisoft, can somebody process it for you with Agisoft?
Yeah, I don't know about that. You know, the Agisoft's a little bit different because there's no real like legislation in place about it. And so I think, at least my thought is that it probably would not, they probably wouldn't care so much about that. It's kind of at least the way I've heard it talked about is an IT security issue. So if somebody else is dealing with the IT security issue, it probably doesn't matter.
Yeah, so we don't have any restricted to ban Agisoft, but we have similar words called security recommendations, which is when you use that Agisoft, they recommend you to disconnect the computer with the internet. That's kind of like a verbal like restriction we received from the UF.
Yeah, unfortunately on our end at USDA, they just took it off our computers. That's what happened to me, but
For the USDA folks, do you happen to know if there are any rules or restrictions around like pass through federal funds that are coming to universities through like NACA agreements?
So I haven't heard of anything that way. I think I would not be surprised at all if suddenly one day an email shows up and that is the case. But I have not seen anything saying that specifically at this point.
My understanding is that according to the Geospatial Bill of 2018, no federal funds can be used to purchase DJI equipment or anything that's forbidden by the federal government. If they're stakeholder funds, you know, things that come from regional grant agencies, you know, that can be wired to, but it can't be derived from the federal government.
Max, I think you might have been one of the people who was talking about trying to contract with outside folks, and I can't remember, and maybe you don't want to, I don't know if you want to disclose or not, but it seems like there were some people, some things they were kind of allowing and other things where they weren't. And well, you just said it sounds like probably not.
We're testing the waters on that a little bit. We submitted a grant to our regional commodity board, and you know I'm a cooperator on that, but I'm not the one who's procuring the equipment. So we're actually hiring a service. So this is a company that we're hiring to provide software and hardware to our university cooperators to help them with their drone flights, and you know they'll be sending the data to me. Once again, no federal funds are being exchanged. It's all commodity board stuff, and I'm a cooperator. I don't receive any funds from this project, but I will be getting the data out of it. Kind of a gray area, and we're just putting our toe in the water and see what happens.
I think the commodity group angle is kind of an interesting way forward. I mean, has your experience so far been that the commodity group is on board and supportive of that, even though it kind of goes against, you know, the direction that the government is going?
I feel like, I mean, the commodity board is just interested in seeing what we can learn from the data. They want to know, will it help our vegetable breeding program? You know, or will it help us better interpret the results of multi-year trials? You know, if it helps them, that's what they're paying for. they don't really care whether or not I work for the feds or work for somebody else. They just want better better outcomes for their commodity, their funded projects.
When we are talking about the funding, do any of you happen to know that are we still allowed to put DJI equipments in the list of equipments when submitting the proposal, or that is a no now to put any DJI equipments in the list of equipments and facilities that we have when submitting the proposals?
Has anyone actually asked any of the like NIFA program directors a question like this?
Sometimes I'm afraid to ask questions that I don't want the answers to.
Like for us, it's easier to ask for forgiveness sometimes than it is to, if I explicitly ask something and they tell me no, and I know the answer is no, I can't do it. But if I'm not quite clear on it, I mean, for this commodity board grant that I put in, you know, I explicitly stated that the equipment that this service provider is a DJI equipment. So I'm not hiding anything from them, but you know, it just depends whether they want to hammer us or not, right?
So I have been on, I think, one email exchange. I was not the person asking, where someone was asking NIFA program officer about this, and they never responded. They didn't even say we won't answer you. They just they just didn't respond. That's not typical for that program officer, because I've worked with them before. So I don't know.
But I think between that and between the fact nobody here can answer some of these questions, and we have some of the world experts on this meeting, it shows what a mess this all is. Sorry, Margaret, I didn't mean to kill the buzz here.
Oh, no, sorry. I think my connection broke up a little bit. Did you ask me a question? Oh, okay.
So I was going to say one other thing about grants is, you know, I mean, I obviously don't have the option anyway to use DJI, even if unless it goes to university or some strange way. But I mean, I would just recommend at this point, like if you're doing a grant, I would just put in the higher dollar amounts, because you know you don't want to get something funded and then a year in you can't buy the stuff you need, right? So yeah, I'm sure you all could figure that out, but that's kind of what I've been doing.
I feel like that's the biggest problem for our group going forward, is that one of the biggest advantages of the Phenomes and stuff is that they're so affordable, right? These other options, they cost so much more. It's just they haven't really given us any affordable options with integrated cameras that are research grade, really. And until we have that, we got to spend 4 to 5 times as much money, 6 times as much money to get a drone that can do the same things that these Phantom 4s can do, you know? So that's a big problem.
And it really sucks if you crash it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if there's anybody from industry on the call, but it might be nice to hear from somebody in industry who's not in USDA or academia, if they have to deal with any of this.
So Seth, this is Matt Bechtel. I don't know if other industry people are here, so I'll limit my comments, but we feel your pain. Is that fair? Yeah, there aren't options, and we're a little bit of a misnomer or a bit of a niche because we focus on such high-end, high-grade systems that we're already very expensive. And because we're focused on multimodality, they're heavy, which means we need medium to heavy lift platforms. So we don't have a lot of good options for you on the low end. I will say though, trying to take a little bit of an economics perspective and not a partisan one, the economics of DJIs were never real. And I think you have to keep that in mind as the US industry catches up to the volume that economies of scale and heavy subsidies can afford. But at the same point, when we started our work 5 years ago, my goal was to try to reduce hardware costs 10% every year. And this will be the first year in 5 years that I will reduce it 20%. The drones themselves have gone up to either doubled or tripled in costs. LiDAR has come down, RGB has been stable, hyperspectral has gone up. We've got conflicts around the world that are causing high-end sensors demand and supply economics to get out of control. So we are very much facing the same challenges you are. On the regulatory side, I made some comments about some of the remote ID. We made the economic decision to just buy remote ID trackers for all of our customers and send them to them for free because we didn't want to impede research. And only for the FAA literally 7 days later to turn around and extend the regulation. So we still feel good about that. It's the right thing to do, but it shows you that we're stuck with the same ambiguity that you are. And I know that our partners like FreeFly and others are really struggling with that as well. So I'll leave it at that. I'm happy to answer questions offline, but yes, we definitely share your frustration with the lack of clarity.
Other questions, comments?
I just have one comment for buying those high cost drones. Here in Florida, I know some department like they ordered the drone by the department. So the faculties can either share some of the funding but not just solely buy the drone by themselves, kind of like to reduce some risk. And also UF it's kind of like last year, they have this plan to order some drones by the university. So the faculties may they want to use that, can share or can like rent or use them like by first come first serve, something like that. That's maybe kind of like reduce some risk or maybe help with the faculties the cost of buying those super expensive drones.
On that point, Seth, this is Matt again. I'll add one last comment. We are starting to see an interesting economic model on the research side, specifically in academics. On that same note of sharing those costs across programs in leasing. And so on the company side, let me take one step back. The insurance side is just as messy as the regulatory side. Liability insurance is very cheap and very easy. When you start to want to insure a payload, they think that it is a Cessna 172. They cannot differentiate risk of 5 or 6 flights a year from operating a real aircraft. It's very frustrating and very expensive. So which is leading to a little bit of concern about a lease model for companies where, okay, let's put together a series of high-end research platforms that academics could lease as a part of their grant. So therefore they spend a lot less money, and 2, they avoid a capital expenditure that they have to upkeep. But it's a really tricky model. But I think if that's something that as you see over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, more interest in, I would make sure to let your corporate partners know. Right now, it's very much in the evaluation phase, but we are getting that question.
Are there any folks here that could speak to personally, the way that I've interacted with UAVs, it's mostly been ones that our group have owned and operated exclusively. Are there other folks in the group that, have had a lot of experience with like sharing a departmental drone or that kind of thing, and can talk about, how well that has worked or not worked?
So I don't see Addie Thompson on here, but I know that she has experience using a core facility, and from my conversations I've had with her, she's been extremely happy with that kind of situation. With basically just a core facility that she pays a certain amount for them to do her flights. We also have been trying to share some drones across units in the federal government, like locally, but haven't gotten too far on that. I'm not sure how it's going to work out. I was on a grant where the idea was to buy one drone, and then we were actually going to ship it across the country every week, or two, or maybe multiple times a week. It didn't get funded, but there are a lot of creative ideas.
I just like to comment that, for the commodity board proposal we put in, the reason why we think it will get funded is because it does service 3 different research programs that do field trials at the same location. So I think that is how you're going to want to move forward. Is you're going to want to have one expensive instrument that can serve, 3 or 4 groups. I mean, you're going to want to fly every week, right? So you only have maybe 3 hours a day where you can fly. So I don't know. You're probably not going to be able to service more than 3 to 5 groups using that, but just something to think about. Yeah, that's a good way to get more bang for your buck for that investment.
Yeah, I think part of it is about the needs of the individual researchers and research program, because when we started the Texas A&M project, we did actually have like a core facility flying everybody's field, and divided up the farms so that they just flew route packs. And if they got your field, great. If they didn't get your field that week, they'd get it the next week. But if you end up having a goal of trying to fly a field every 3 days or 4 days, it ends up being pretty tricky to have a core facility or share stuff. So I think that the core facility aspect's probably better if you're going to go for, 2 to 10 flights rather than 20 to 30 flights.
Yeah, that was my experience at Utah State also. Utah State kind of has this like internal service provider called Aggie Air, and you can pay them to come fly your field. And I worked with them for, I think it was 3 flights, and they were awesome to work with. I got to use a sensor that we wouldn't have otherwise had, but we certainly couldn't have afforded more than those 3 flights. And then also the scheduling was difficult as well. And I think just with the costs and grants and everything, everything else has gotten so much more expensive. Having a graduate student, having, all kinds of the other budget items on a grant proposal. So it's just getting hard to find a way to fit these costs in.
I see Dr. Sankaran is on. I think she flies for a few programs at Washington State, don't you? I don't know if she's on.
We don't actually. Nowadays, everyone has their own.
Oh, do they? Okay.
It's mostly DJI.
Other questions, other topics?
I just wanted to add flying as a service. I think the travel is a time killer. So getting all the way from one field to another field takes a long time. So sharing a drone for the field season, and our field season is pretty short, can be very challenging.
So one question I have, and we mentioned it a little bit here and there, but has anybody found any sorts of solutions for insuring drones that actually works? Like any at all? Because that's our big worry on investing into one. And then, you know, you lose it the first week you have it because of something happening or whatever. But we haven't really seen any good options to cover that other than buying cheap drones and just replacing it or going to send it off to get fixed. Right now, our main solution is just to buy a replacement because those Autels are like $5,000, but that's not a permanent solution, you know?
This is Matt again. I'll jump in with two quick comments. On average, we see about 20 to 25% premium on any platform. So you can imagine on ours, it's very, very expensive. The other comment I will offer to you, we have seen customers that have had incidents and it got very ugly at the at the university level for a couple of reasons. You know, one, you know, what we hear a lot from customers is that, oh, well, the university self-insures. Well, that may be true, but that doesn't mean that there's a lot of pain and time lost when you go through that process. In one instance, we know that it took approximately 10 months to get them back up and running with an equivalent platform. The second problem is you have to be, this is just general advice, make sure that you note everything that's on your drone when you acquire them, every serial number for every sensor, and that is on the paperwork. Because what we found was that all those serial numbers and such weren't on the original paperwork, so insurance didn't want to cover it because it wasn't listed on the original purchase. And given the multiple levels that I know all of you have to fight through, whether it's university or federal government, that's just our advice of what we've seen with other customers. Just do the due diligence and make sure everything is on that initial paperwork when you see the insurance.
Thank you for the
Hey, Ace, this
good
is
information.
Madison Dixon with Mississippi State University. I'll add to Matthew had two great points there, and I'll just add to that. This probably isn't applicable to most folks on the call, but in my time with MSU, I previously worked at the Flight Research Laboratory, which was unique at Mississippi State in that it had a fleet of traditional manned aircraft assets in addition to the UAS assets. And so again, to Matthew's point, the university as a whole self-insures, but the only unit or laboratory at Mississippi State that I'm aware of that carried additional insurance was that Flight Research Laboratory. And to make a long story short, the insurance provider that we used for our manned aircraft fleet, although they were reluctant to eventually add UAS to our policy, they did come around to that. So for anyone at any university, whether it's for administrator travel, if you have a university jet or any manned aircraft assets at your university that are insured, that might be the path of least resistance to find a policy or to add to an existing policy that covers both replacement as well as liability of the operation of the aircraft.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for weighing in, guys. I'm just trying to think like how we can proceed. I guess part of it is just going to be like, be really careful when you fly the drone. Don't, put too big of a payload, check the propellers really well. But at some point there's just freak things that can happen and you're just out of luck, I guess. But that's just part of the game.
Yeah, I know I saw a bald eagle attack a drone over Lake Michigan here recently, and it was lost. So freak things do happen.
Yeah.
So there were a couple questions about making presentation available and making the recording available. So this was recorded. Not everybody is given the okay on this being shared. So if we get that, we will share the full video somehow. We'll talk amongst the group and figure out how to do that. We can maybe put it on YouTube or something like that. There was also a request to share PowerPoint slides, and if the presenters want to do that, we'll figure out a way to get that somewhere.
Did we have, Seth, did we have something like a survey for folks?
We did not have one planned or plugged in, but I'm happy to type one up. We have
Oh.
everybody's email who should have logged in. Oh, Anna's on.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I have one kind of made up. We'll go just double check it right after this. And then, like I said, I think since Seth sent the invite, it should save all the emails. So I believe we'll be able to just send it out that way. Might be the easiest.
Great. And that will help us kind of figure out how to go and keep these conversations and connections happening.
So, and for the people who are still on, this is, we had planned this as being one of 4 or 5 different discussions that we'll have over this semester. Another topic that rises to the top quite often is data storage and where to store it. And so if you'd like to be a panelist and give a presentation or lead a discussion on that, please let us know. There were a couple other topics, and unfortunately I don't have the list in front of me, but if there are topics regarding UAVs and agriculture that you're interested in, there's multiple other people probably interested in, multiple other groups that have people that can address it. So feel free to communicate on those, and we'll get another session set up.